Today we're going to be going over this crazy little foot. It's called the automatic buttonhole foot. It can also be known as the one-step buttonhole foot. So what does it do? Well, the name kind of gives it away, right? It does buttonholes. But how does it work? And what happens when your stitches don't turn out right? I'll cover all that and more. Let's get started. Hey everybody, Trisha here with Sewing Parts Online. So the automatic buttonhole foot. When you first peek at it, it does look a little confusing, but rest assured it's pretty straightforward. So let's take a closer look at the anatomy of it. This is the buttonhole for the Babylock Verve. This style is very common. Although I'm showing you the one on the Verve, the process is going to be similar on other machines that have a one-step buttonhole option. Here we have the button guide plate. Grab a button, you just place it in there and push it closed. Notice the space depending on the button size that you put in there. That will come into play when we get to the machine. This little bar is where your shank or presser foot holder attaches to the foot, and then the little hole is where the needle goes down into the machine. Because the upper thread needs to be under the presser foot when you begin sewing, I find it easiest to place the thread through before attaching the foot. Now lift up your presser foot, slide that in there. Not everybody knows this, but if you lift your presser foot lifter just a little bit higher, it gives you a smidge more height. Then lower the shank onto the bar and it'll click right in. Now you'll want to select your stitch. Oftentimes you'll see several different buttonhole options. You may have a few or you may have a bunch. In your manual, there will be a section that lists all the different stitches. It will tell you the names of the different buttonhole options and when to use them. Today I'm using a medium weight fabric, and I prefer the rectangle look, so I'm going to go with 4-04. As you can see, the stitch width and the stitch length automatically change to what is a good starting point, but you can change that if you'd like. Depending on your machine, you may also have a display on the side, giving you a little preview of what it looks like. Say you have your buttonhole marked on your garment, it's going to work from the front to the back. What I like to do is put my fabric underneath the foot. Before lowering your presser foot, rotate the hand wheel towards you, dropping the needle right on that spot. Then lower my presser foot. Next, we have to remember to pull down the lever, making sure that it's behind the bracket, and we're good to go. If your buttonhole doesn't look like this and your machine doesn't have this lever, make sure that you stick around and I'll show you a couple of other styles in just a bit. Now we can make our buttonhole. Because we are working with a one-step buttonhole foot, the whole process will happen as soon as we step on our foot control or press our start-stop button. The buttonhole starts at the front, and then it stitches one side, comes back and bar tacks the front, then it stitches the other side, and lastly, it bar tacks at the end. The machine will automatically secure everything when it's done. To better understand the movements of a buttonhole foot, I always suggest testing on scraps like this before moving on to your project. And we can lift it up. Ta-da! A buttonhole is made up of bar tacks and satin stitches. So to explain, a bar tack is a series of stitches that are really close together that are positioned in places on a garment that undergo stress. So your buttonhole, or you'll often see them next to a pocket. And then your satin stitch, well, those are just simply zigzag stitches really close together. To open your buttonhole, first place a pin at the end. This is just going to keep you from cutting through the buttonhole. Using your seam ripper, carefully open it up. Sometimes you may find that your stitches look sloppy or they're maybe too far apart. Let's go over that. Use interfacing. You may hear that you don't have to, but if you want to achieve beautiful buttonholes, I would just suggest trying to make it a habit. Let's think about it for a second. You'll be buttoning and unbuttoning your garment many times over. The interfacing will help the fabric maintain its shape and integrity. If you are having a lot of problems, you can also use a stabilizer. I don't often use a stabilizer, but a tearaway is my preference when I do. Keep in mind the interfacing will stay with the project forever and ever, whereas the stabilizer is removed. It's essentially providing a stable base for better stitches. After the buttonhole is complete, you simply tear away the stabilizer. Let's say you were using the holes as a design element and you were weaving ribbon or fabric through, and you wouldn't be buttoning and unbuttoning. In that case, you could argue that you won't have to use interfacing, but it definitely doesn't hurt anything. Always do a trial buttonhole before moving on to your project. As I mentioned before, it helps you to understand the movement of your buttonhole foot, but it also helps you to work out any kinks. Double check your stitch width and your stitch length. If you are looking at your buttonhole and you see that there's too much space between the stitches, lower your stitch length. That's going to bring your stitches closer together. If there's not enough space, increase your stitch length. As an example, when I choose 4-04 for the rectangle buttonhole, my machine automatically sets it to a 0.4 stitch length, but personally, I like a denser buttonhole, so I drop it down to a 0.2. You can also play around with the width, adjusting it to be more narrow or to be wider. So your buttonhole doesn't look like mine. That's okay. Just know there's lots of different kinds. Some common ones are the sensor buttonhole foot. This literally has a little cord that comes out of the side of the foot. It's plugged into the side of your machine. Where you would normally pull that little bar down so your machine can determine how large the buttonhole would be, the sensor does all of that. You'll generally find this on a higher end machine. Next, we've got the sliding 4-step buttonhole foot. This buttonhole foot looks a little like the one we're using, however, it's more simplified. Instead of pressing your foot control or the start-stop button and the whole thing being done in one fell swoop, this 4-step buttonhole foot, you're in control of each step. To better understand how this option works, check out episode 13 of our Beginner's Guide to Sewing, zippers, buttons, and everything in between. Since we cover everything in between, to skip right to the section of the video with the 4-step buttonhole, go to timestamp 1338. I'll also include a link for that video at the end of this video. This one's a little bit harder to see since it's clear, but this is a snap-on buttonhole foot that was intended for some older singers. I've not personally used it, but looking at the manual, it's indicating that it too is a 4-step buttonhole foot. What I always recommend is just double checking your manual and it'll walk you through the process. If you're unsure what type of buttonhole foot your machine has, shoot me a comment. Let me know your make and model and I'll see what I can find out for you. Also, when shopping for a machine, be sure to let the customer service representative know what type of buttonhole foot you're interested in. That will help them direct you appropriately. But honestly, I would recommend going just a little bit more so you can get this feature. It really is convenient and I find it much easier than the 4-step buttonhole. Here's that video with the information on the 4-step buttonhole, and you can also check out this other video on the automatic buttonhole foot. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, happy sewing, everybody.